Hello there, and you certainly are there, and I am here. Yes, you are there. Quite a lot of new subscribers, so to all you new guys listening, welcome. Leave a sarcastic thumbs up, commenting down below. Don't be a Derek, you'll get used to that. Thanks for coming back. This is Transcribed episode 2, looking at the defence question by Donald Findlay QC of Shane Mitchell with regards to the conviction of the 2005 conviction of Luke Mitchell for the murder of his girlfriend Jodi Jones in 2003 in East Houses, Dalkeith in Edinburgh, Scotland. As I said, the first episode we looked at the prosecution question by Alan Turnbull QC. If I was to kind of summarise that here, I would kind of say that he'd done a really good job towards the end of his question, just nailing down some definites that Shane had issues with. In terms of, well, for one, Luke Mitchell actually hadn't put Shane Mitchell in the house during the time of the family meal, during police questioning, and Shane was shown that. But also Shane did reiterate the fact that he couldn't recall seeing Luke in the house at the time, and he was in the house till after 6pm, which was well after the time Luke Mitchell claims to have left the house to meet Jodi Jones, according to his alibi. So, well, actually, don't take it from me, take it from me. So, again, do you see that? It's the second question down for the top. Shane says yes. Answer: yeah, I had it before I left. Question: before you left? Answer: yeah. Then, was that with Shane and your mum? Answer: my mum. You were there. Shane wasn't, was he? Mother: no. Do you see that? And Shane says yes. That's the very point. And it's always been true, Mr. Mitchell, despite the way it has been recorded, that you have no recollection of seeing Luke when you went downstairs in the kitchen and your mum came home. Shane says yes. So now reach the truth then, Mr. Mitchell, haven't we? Yes. And the truth doesn't change, does it? No. How could it be, Mr. Mitchell, that Luke was in the house, you didn't think he was there, you didn't hear him, and then have no recollection of seeing him there if he was? And he says, you tell me. But there we go, that's it. But as I say, thank you very much, guys, for subscribing and the views on the last video. That was much appreciated. I was very worried about putting up and what good it would do, but I put these here, as I say, in the last video because I do find that a lot of people don't like reading mass amounts, but there is a certain kind of section of people that would like to listen to someone and maybe just kind of help them through it in that sense. Again, my editorialising, you guys are welcome to scream at the TV and tell me I'm mental, or your phone, or wherever you look at this. Don't do it if you're in the bathroom. That might seem even stranger. Somebody might think you're in trouble. But as I say, just don't be a Derek. That's as simple as that in the comments. Don't be a Derek. I don't make a habit, guys, I will say to all the new folk, I don't make a habit of banning anyone from chat for having an opinion. There is only one person who has ever been banned from my chat, and they will remain nameless. But they are gone. As I say, what we'll do is we'll go into the question by Donald Findlay. We'll have a little kind of wrap up at the end where I want to go through some of the things that have been said by Sandra Lee and Scott Forbes in relation to this question, because I think with Shane, my honest opinion is that they've just rewritten this whole thing, and they use what's essentially Donald Findlay's techniques, and I'll go into it at the end, to rewrite what was said on the stand. But we've got everything here and then some. So let's get into that at the end, but for now, let's try and read some English badly. So moving on from all of that and getting into the the question by Donald Findlay. Get that last page back up. There you see cross-examination by Mr. Findlay. So on the 14th of April, Mr. Mitchell, you were apprehended by the police, I think. And Shane says yes. And he says, where were you living at that time? Not redacted, but there's the home address there, New Battle Abbey Crescent. Where were you apprehended? And he says, on New Battle Road, just outside the entrance to Dalkeith Police Station. And Finlay asks, where were you going? He says, to my work. To your work? Yes. Was that an unusual event for you to go to your work that day? He says, no. Was it unusual for you to leave home and to go to your work that's supposed to be that day? And he says, no. So just tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury how you were apprehended. What happened? So Shane says, the police had set up a roadblock. A roadblock, yes, to catch you going from your house to work. A journey that you did every working day. Have I got that right? And he says, yes. A roadblock, I see. And what happened at this roadblock? What was involved in this roadblock to apprehend somebody who was doing something as mundane as going from their house to their work? And he says, I can't remember in particular, but at first I thought it was a tyre check. He says, because there were a load of other cars stopped, so well, the policeman put his hand up, told me to stop, and at that instant the car was surrounded by police. Mr. Findlay goes on to question, surrounded, how many police officers surrounded your car? I genuinely can't remember whether it was about 4 or 5 cars. Incomprehensible. I think it's supposed to be worth, but the cars were hidden further up the road, so like it's supposed to be so many cars worth of police. 4 or 5 cars of them, which would be 2 a car, wouldn't it? Or 1 a car, depending on how many were in the car. So it could be anywhere between 4 to 10 people. I think I was very distressed at the time, so I'd probably no be remembering things exactly. Well, I can just pause there. Did you find this distressing? Shane says, very distressing. I had my head in the car on the way out because I was driving incomprehensible car. They ripped my keys off me and they were shouting and screaming at me. Let's just stop there again. We'll take our time because I want the jury to have a picture of the police methods and the attitude, if we can please. You understand? Shane agrees. They dragged you out of the car? Yes. Were you resisting getting out of the car? Not in any way at all. Did any policeman come up and simply ask you, Mr. Mitchell, we're here to detain you. Will you get out of your car please? No, not at all. Did they drag you out of the car? At that point I still didn't have a clue. I didn't have a clue what was going on until 5 minutes later. You say they ripped the keys from you. Shane goes on to clarify, they ripped the keys out of the ignition, then they started shouting and screaming. Well, they took the keys so you didn't drive away. Why did, and he says, top of their voice asking where my fucking keys were. Oh good, I get swearing, it's not me that's doing it. They were shouting and swearing at me. Let's just hear what the police said, please. So the jury have the pictures. They were shouting and screaming at you, wanting to know where your fucking house keys were. Aye. But I'd love to have heard that in Donald Findlay's voice. Well, where were your fucking house keys? On the ring of the car keys that they had ripped out of the car. So you were making no attempt to conceal them? No, I tried to shout that they were on the car keys. Then I can't remember. I think I was being held at the time and I couldn't get the words out. Did the police seem to be interested in what you had to say at that point in time? Shane says no. When you say the police were shouting and screaming at you, do you mean the policeman or more than one policeman? I don't honestly remember. Why? He says there was several police around me, but I don't know how many were shouting. Who was shouting at me, sorry. Several police around you. So we have you subjected to being dragged out of your car, shouted and sworn at, keys ripped out of your ignition in the midst of a roadblock, all as a part of a journey that you were taking, a normal journey from your house to your place of work? And he says yes. Have I got that right? Yes, I tried to ask a few times. I said, what was this about? And they just ignored the question. Well, I'm interested in that point now, sorry. Was there even a modicum of courtesy in all this from the police officers to somebody who, after all, is a member of the public, in that they told you why they were shouting and screaming at you, swearing at you, manhandling you, and removing the keys from your ignition? Did anybody have the courtesy to tell you why? He says, no, not for about 10 minutes, until they had me locked in the back of the car. I would have went peacefully if, probably asked. Well, I was going to ask you about that. Would you have gone peacefully if the police had behaved in a reasonable manner? Of course. Any reason not to? Shane says, no reason, no. So, what state were you in, Mr. Mitchell, by the time you were at the police station? Distressed, disorientated, and confused. Well, you were interviewed by police officers over many hours. He says, yes. Is that right? Yes. Did you find that distressing? Yes. Why did you find that distressing? Just in your own words. He says, because it's hard not to. Anyone who has been in that sort of situation before, it's incomprehensible. You asked for a solicitor and you were told that you weren't getting one. And he says, yes. So you were alone with the police? And he says, yes. Right, now you're a grown man. That, obviously, there's no question of that. But the fact of the matter is you were alone with the police, yes. Suggestion was made by you at some point in time that the police, you had told them things in the past that weren't true. Yes. Now you had told them that things in the past that were wrong. Shane says yes. In your first statement, yes. Can we just be clear about this? Is it correct that after the first statement you contacted the police? Shane says, to be honest, I can't remember if I contacted them or they contacted me, but that's a bit odd. He went from I don't remember to I must have done, and now they might have contacted him again. Just muddying the water some more there. Well, did you volunteer in the sense of providing to the police information to the effect, look, what I said the first time, I've made mistakes? And Shane agrees. I want you to try and get it right. That's what happened. So there was no question of you having to be rung up out of... There was no question of that having to be wrung up out of you by the police. Pardon? There is no question of that concession having to be wrung out of you by the police. And Shane says no. Well then, we get to the second interview. Would the ladies and gentlemen of the jury be right, please, that Miss Lindsay, the police officer who was interviewing you on the second occasion, seemed more interested in hearing from you what she wanted to hear rather than what you wanted to say? Shane says yes, on several things. She would say, no, I can't accept that answer from you. You have to tell me something else. I won't accept that answer. Did that surprise you? That should be the attitude of the police officer? Shane says, I thought she'd take what I had to say at face value. Well, if you're correcting a statement where you'd made mistakes and then you're saying you should take it at face value, how does that go hand in hand? Clarifying things, if not pushing for a definite answer on a thing that you seem vague on and you might give more information on, that doesn't make any sense. But well, obviously you made mistakes, and Shane says yes. And as you have told the jury, you, for reasons which no doubt as the ladies and gentlemen of the world they can understand, you were reluctant to go into detail about the internet session. Shane says, I didn't think it was relevant. Absolutely. That will leave with the jury. You will also accept, I suppose, Mr. Mitchell, that if, for example, you were to be given a statement to the police and said, I got the bus from New Battle Abbey Crescent into town at 5:30, and the policeman said, well, that can't be right, Mr. Mitchell, because in fact the bus leaves New Battle Abbey Crescent at 5:45, Are you with me? Yes. Then presumably you might be prepared to say, well, it must have been 5:45. Yes. Yes. But in the statement, that would probably be written down. Well, that's what I want to look at. So you will agree, obviously, that the police are entitled to say to you, are you sure about that? And he says yes. They are also entitled to say to you, provided that they're being fair, we have the information that is different from what you're telling us. How does that all fit in? This would be a reasonable thing to do, wouldn't it? Yes, that would be fine. Because the police are there to investigate, not just to write down what people say. Yes. And you would also agree that presumably, Mr. Mitchell, that a police officer would be entitled to say that somebody, in the appropriate circumstances, I don't think that's true, because 4 people say that you were in the pub and you say you weren't. So what do you make of that? They'd be entitled to challenge what somebody says. Shane agrees with it. Provided they do it in a reasonably and fairly. He says yes. Do we get the impression, Mr. Mitchell, that you do not feel you were being treated fair by Ms. Lindsay? And Shane says yes, he agrees. Because what it would seem was happening, that was Miss Lindsay had things in mind. She wanted to get him onto our page. I think that's improper English, and you were going to enable her to do that. Is that correct? He says, I would say that. Sounds about right. Yeah. It didn't seem like that at the time. No. But at the time, I was, and this is incomprehensible, but probably upset, stressed, one of those words. I'm sure there's plenty we can fit in there. Well, let's see if we can understand why that might, in fairness, be. Are you quite a nervous guy in some ways? In some ways, Shane says. I do not wish to pry unnecessarily, and I won't go into detail at all. You may have that assurance, at least from me. You had a problem from years ago with drugs, and Shane agrees. That has affected your memory in a whole variety of ways, I think, and Shane says yes. Yes, and in general terms, particularly back then, because we're going back a long time, and he says yes. Closer to when you had the problem, and he says yes. Did you find it difficult to sort out sometimes what you could actually remember about events or days or times or that kind of thing? Very. I found it difficult to concentrate at times as well. Well, that's the next thing I was going to ask. And as a part of that, you found it difficult to concentrate? Yes. Right. By the court, what kind of drugs were these? Shane says cannabis, ecstasy, speed, a little bit of cocaine. That was all years ago, 99, 2000, but it didn't affect me for a long time after that. I've no touched any. She says, I didn't catch that last bit. For several years I've not touched anything, since about the end of 2000 and the very beginning of 2001. Can I just stop there and just say that is nonsense? Even just so cannabis, ecstasy, speed, and a little bit of cocaine causing memory problems, but only the memory problems that we see here. That's what I mean about the trying to get around things. That is, does anybody really believe that? Does anybody believe that? I might be alone. Moving on. Continued, by Mr. Findlay. On the 30th of June 2003, let's go through the day very quickly. You got up in the morning, obviously. You went to work. Yes. You were at work. Yes. You left work. Yes. You went to see a friend with a view to seeing if you could fix a car. Yes. You popped into a wholesaler's to get some tools, pieces of equipment, whatever it was. Aha. Incomprehensible there. Sure, you went to see a friend and he wasn't there. he's chatted to his sister. It must have been you chatted to his sister. Yes. Mother as well. I can't remember. I think his brother might have been there as well. We'll just adding people to this one, huh? This chat gets bigger. Some other member of the family. I could be wrong. Not there. You came home, and he says yes. You went on the internet. Aha. You watched a bit of porn. Yes. So again, this idea that it was all pop-ups and that, it was other sites, even under questioning with Donald Findlay, Shane does say it's, porn that he's watching. I have a wee bit at the end of the video where I'll look at some other stuff, so I'll try and keep my editorialising till the minimum. You looked at some car sites in which you have an interest, says yes, and you downloaded specifically a picture of a guy called Hamesy, I believe that is. We'll go with Hamesy. Aye. Now Hamesy is in the picture that the ladies and gentlemen of the jury have seen. It's of a man. Well, it's not a man. It's a digitally enhanced picture. It's a joke. It's a joke made by another member of the car club that I'm a member of. One of the other members. It's purely a joke. Donald Findlay says, right. That's why I saved it on my document, because it was really funny. Sure. For a laugh. I put it this way. In a question, let me see in general terms I've got you right. Hamesy is connected with the car site, and Shane says yes. That's his name, says yes. Jesus, the easiest word. And somebody made this picture of Hamesy, all made up. I think that's supposed to be all male up. Hamesy up in female clothes. And he says yes. And Hamesy was not too enamoured of that. No, he found it quite funny. Do your research a bit better, Donald. Oh, he actually found it funny. Yes. Alright, but there was some concern, if I'm understanding what I've been reading, that it was thought that this might get deleted, so copies were being kept, so that if necessary, they could be fed back into the system again, that sort of thing. And Shane says yes. Alright, now to this point in time, we're round about the back of 5. Yeah, yes. Can I suggest, Mr. Mitchell, that at this point in time, it has been remarkably ordinary day. Shane says very ordinary, so ordinary there was nothing memorable about it. Right, I'm always working on people's cars. Sure. Now, as the day progressed, did you have any reason to think to yourself, well, I'd better remember, for example, that I went to see my friend to fix his car, because that might be important in the days, weeks, months, and even years that lie ahead. And he says no reason at all. Incomprehensible there at the end. Before I move on to the next page, I just want to point out something that came to me when I was reading it as well at the time. If he's always fixing people's cars and he's got a problem with his memory, how does he know what car he was fixing on that day and who was there and who wasn't there to have a conversation with? Pretty definite they had a conversation with the guy's sister. I'm pretty sure it was him that was fixing the car. Doesn't remember that much. Always fixed. So how did he not get confused as to whose car he was fixing? Just a thought. Carrying on over the next page. I mean, do you think any more from your experience of life as they go through what is otherwise abnormal or mundane day pays any great attention to where they were, who they spoke to, what happened with a view to being recollected in years to come? And he says no. No, that would be stupid thing to that would be a stupid thing to suggest, wouldn't it? Aye, would it? It if possible, could I take a wee 5-minute break at some time soon? Are you feeling uncomfortable? I'm needing to use the restroom. Can you bear with me for just a few minutes and then his lordship's leave? We do have a morning break. We might be able to take it a little earlier. Right, that would be excellent. So, could you bear with me a little while if that's acceptable? I've got a sore throat. Drink of water. So, Lord Nimblesmith. Well, I think maybe he should just leave the room for a short time. We can wait. And at this point, the witness left the court but returned shortly thereafter. Two breaks that Shane's had, and I don't grudge him either of the breaks that he's had, considering the amount of time that he's been on the stand. But again, we'll go into that later on, but let's just put that in mind. That's 2 breaks that he's had as well, that he's asked for, and he's got no problem. Continued by Mr. Findlay. By the back of 5, in fact, by the time you came back from having seen your friend at 10 o'clock, just before 10? Yes. A mundane day? Yes. But, as we all know, of course, thereafter, not only did it cease to be a mundane day, but a whole series of terrible events happened, and Shane says yes. And in the days and weeks thereafter, yes, but I didn't have any inkling as to what was going on until much later on that night, even then. Let me try and find out, where was it that you first got an inkling that what might perhaps be a serious matter? He says, when I got woken up from my sleep by a phone call. Carrying on, do you know when that was? No, I'm sorry. Incomprehensible clock. Was that from your mum? Yes. And you discovered the cause in due course that Jodi was dead? Shane says yes. And you knew that Jodi was Luke's girlfriend? Yes. At that point I didn't even know it was a murder. Sure. Then all sorts of things happened and the police were all over your family, as they were other people? Shane says yes. And that was obviously a very difficult time for the whole family? Yes. Right, can we just understand this? Luke was Jodi's boyfriend? Yes. You knew that. Did you know Jodi? Not very well. No, I mean really, did you have much in common with Luke? Did you share interests? No. At that point in time I was out the house more than ever because I was trying to start up a business, so I was out of the house all the time. I was always tired. Sure. Did you actually bother what Luke was doing or anything else? I mean, did it really matter much to you what his interests were or anything like that? And he says no. He says day starts off mundanely. It's as mundane as far as you're concerned until the middle of the night. He says yes. And the first indication that you get that there is other than mundane is when you're awakened by your mum. Yes. Who is upset? Yes. And you discover about something has happened to Jodi. Police are involved. Just putting it very generally, Luke is involved because the police are speaking to him. The whole world suddenly changes. Shane says, I don't really think I got that much information at the time. I just got told to bring some clothes up to the police station. Right, I'm compacting things here a little, but that's roughly what happened. That over the next few days, life must have been chaotic in the extreme, and Shane agrees. Now, did you go to the police station with clothes for Luke? Yes. Right, did you go back to your bed again? Eventually, I was told to, so I took the trip. My car was running low on gas, so the only place that would sell my car would only run on gas. It couldn't run on petrol, so you actually mean gas as opposed to the Americanism for petrol? Aye, propane. Right. So the only place that sold propane at that time of night was Dreghorn, so I took a trip over to Dreghorn and back, and Dreghorn is where? And he says halfway down the city bypass. Right, let's just assume at this point in time you're at least a bit wondering about what that is all about. Is that a fair way of putting it? He says yes. The next morning, let's just say any time before you interviewed by the police, yes. Did you sit down and say to yourself, now I must work out in my mind, maybe even make a note of what I did on the 30th of June? Shane says, I was a bit naive in that I thought that I wouldn't have to, but because of any, he says, at that point in time I couldn't even picture getting seen by the police. Right, because on any views of matters, whatever that had happened, it had nothing to do with you because you didn't really know Jodi. And Shane says yes. So it was of no concern of yours at all. And he says no. I understand. Let's just take one example, if we can, Mr. Mitchell. You would know by the time that you were interviewed by the police for the first time that Jodi had been killed. And he says yes. And presumably you would appreciate that it was at least an important matter if the police were coming to speak to you. Sorry, I mean, you wouldn't take that lightly. And Shane says no. And you spoke to them, yes. And they took a statement from you, yes. And just have that in front of you, if you will, again, please. 157. Shane says yes. And if you go to the first statement, does it run to 13 pages? This is S48. S48, that's the one. That's taken on the 3rd of July. I think you'll find it runs to 13 pages, he says yes. And just take a full page at random, any page you like, doesn't matter. Just got to show them a trick. Page 2, maybe as good as any. I just want to illustrate. Give it to the operator beside you, please. Just so the ladies and gentlemen of the jury can see what Ms. Lindsay's handwriting is very small, and there is a serious number of words on the page. Yeah, it was very, very, very long statement. Right, and it couldn't read. I couldn't read the whole of it properly because I can't make out the handwriting. You'll see it's incomprehensible. That's ironic. Very difficult to read. Well, by the court, is that your signature at the bottom of the page? Yes. And also in the left hand margin near the top? Yes. Against the line where there has been a connection? He says yes. So cross-examination, just kind of going through the fact that you did sign this, you did agree to this, yeah? One point I do want, before we go on and move on, before I do forget, we did see in the earlier statement, the last episode, when under questioning Luke Mitchell and Corinne Mitchell were discussing Shane not being in the house during tea time, and in that conversation there was a question from Corinne to Luke about Shane giving Luke a torch. So here we have that Shane says the first he knew was a phone call, but you think he would know if he was giving torches out. Just a thought. So yes, that was just before I move on from that one. Continued by Mr. Findlay. I think, as you've seen, it is not just you that would have difficulty reading it. It's not that easy hand to read. An easy hand to read, sorry. No, well, that's not what I'm really interested in. There is a lot of words on the page, and there are 14 pages. Yes. So there is a lot of information being taken from you by the police, and put onto those pages. Yes. Yeah, and yet, not that by any manner of means you're alone in this case, and yet you get a timing way out because you thought you were home a good hour or more before you actually were, and Shane agrees. He says now, Donald Findlay says, sorry, now this is 3 days after. How do you make such a mistake? Do you know now, looking back on it, how you made such a mistake? Shane says, to be honest, I can't remember the entire week. It was that much of a blur. Well, it's an interesting observation. We'll leave it at that and come back to it if I can for a moment, please. And he says, I can't remember a thing that was in the statement now. He says, so this was just a mistake that you'd made. Shane says, yeah, but incomprehensible. not just on the events of that day, they'd asked me about the events of the previous weeks and months, and I couldn't get incomprehensible. Donald Findlay, I wondered that. Would that be the only mistake that you made? And he said no. And you perhaps answered this question. Let me just put it again. And would that be because of all the things that you and I were discussing? Your own memory problems, the way you reacted to what was happening, the whole business of being with the police, that the events round about this period of time became blurred. And Shane says, very, very. And when you speak to many of my friends, they'll tell you sometimes I can't remember what I done half an hour ago. Cliche, but it's true. Well, let's test it this way. You've been asked by the police on a number of occasions, put aside please, because I'm not interested in any conversation you had with a fiscal. Forget that. Put that to one side. You've also been asked in court questions by the gentleman now sitting down, the learned advocate depute. 30th of June is a matter that you have been asked about and have no doubt talked about on many, many occasions. Shane says yes. You went into that night to see a friend. Says yes. You came in from work about 5 o'clock. Yes. What did you have for your tea? I can't remember. You see, on a view, you must be able to remember, Mr. Mitchell. Let me put this to you. You must be able to remember because you have been asked uphill and down till what you had for your tea. What did you have for tea? He says, I'm told I had. No. What you remember. Just. What I remember, I can't remember. And he says, Don Findlay says, well, where did you have it? He says, in the house. Yes, so you get in the house, yes. You didn't go out for something to eat, no. Well, where in the house did you have it? And he says, I can't remember. Who did you have it with? I can't remember if I ate it alone or I went up the stairs. Sometimes I would eat down the stairs. Sometimes I would eat on my own. Shane's starting to put people in the house for his dinner now with Donald Findlay. Why? When did you have it? And he says, just before I went out. Do you remember that, or are you assuming that? He says, I remember eating my dinner. Aye, you remember eating it, but do you remember you had it just before you went out, or do you assume that you had it just before you went out? And he says, I assume I had it just before I went out. So you don't actually remember? No. Did you have tatties and steak pie?
Do you like pie?
I'm told I did. No. I appreciate what you want to tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury because you have been told things by other people which may or may not be right. But let's just try and concentrate on what you do remember. And that may seem pedantic, but that's the way I want you to proceed. You understand? And he says, yes, I understand. Could you have had tatties and steak pie? Yes. Could the steak pie have been a bit burnt? And he says yes. Well, it's always possible. It doesn't mean it happened. Now, your mum was a vegetarian. Yes. Obviously doesn't eat meat. Yes. She might eat prawns. Yes. Or a chippy. Wait, what? She's a vegetarian and eats prawns. What? So she doesn't eat meat? No. Okay. Do you know what your mum had for her tea then? No. Could she have had prawns? Yes. But how could she? Well, she could have had chicken for that matter. Aye. No, she's a vegetarian. How is she having prawns and chicken if she's a vegetarian? Am I losing it? There's chicken, no... Whatever. You just don't remember. And Shane says, what kind of music was Luke into? Heavy metal. And your tastes are dance music. So you wouldn't have much in common in terms of music. No, poles apart. Can we take it And then as far as Luke's music is concerned, it's not something that you would listen to. And he says no. No reason to, no. Don't like it, no. More likely to ignore it or shut it off, I suppose, yes. Alright, when you came in, if Luke was in the house and you came in from work, would you say to him, what do you call him, Luke or kid, or, and he says Luke, would you come in and say, hi Luke, what were you doing at school today? How did you get on at school? And he says sometimes. How often? Or not often? Shane says once a week or something, just depends on the situation. Says yeah. Says when I first came in, right, it doesn't really amount to this, that if you were in a situation where there was a conversation, you might speak to Luke about school and things like that. And he says, I mean, being blunt about it, were you much fussed about how he was getting on at school? Not really, no. So conversation between you and Luke was not a regular event, no. When you would go into the house, was it quite common for the front door to be locked? And he said, very common. Strange. There is nothing unusual about that. No, we forgot to lock it quite often. And so that's supposed to be unlocked then. When you go into the house, was it quite common for the front door to be unlocked, I think? Because obviously there is nothing unusual about that. No, we forgot to lock it quite often. So unlocked then. Go back and change that retrospectively. And if you went home before 5, you would know your mum wouldn't be in unless there was something odd. Yes. Because she normally got home about 5 for tea. Normally, yes. Did the business shut at 5? Yeah. Right, when you go in and shout hello, what would be your normal shout be if you go in the house? Hello. Hello. Aye. And when are your fucking house keys? Is that a hello? I'm in. I'm ready to engage in social exchanges with whoever may be in, or is it simply you're saying hello, I'm in? Aye, hello, I'm in. Do you actually, or did you actually care whether anybody replied or not? No. But he can't remember if he had dinner, but he does remember if it, well, I suppose that's no on that occasion. That's just in general. I'm being hyperbolic. No, and can we be clear about this? Perhaps touched upon the learned advocate depute, but I don't think we pursued, so can we revisit it? I perhaps understood the suggestion being floated by you that you went into the house that night, or by the time you got into the house that night, you had decided to go and just to go and look at porn. Is that right? And he says, pardon? By the time you were going into the house, you had already decided to look at porn. Is that right? And he says, yes. Why or when did you decide that? He says, I don't know. Well, do you remember when it was it when you were driving down the road, you thought to yourself, I must have a look at a bit of porn when I get in. I must have a look at that porn. I just could see that. Or was it that you were going into the house, you thought, well, I'll go and see what's on the Hun site, or is it... I'm sorry, I can't change these pages. As you were going, he says, incomprehensible, probably just I was going into the house. Alright, I can't remember. Sure, so you go into the house, you're going to go and look at your computer, and the chances are you'd be looking at the combination between a bit of porn and a bit of car stuff. Yes, and also see if there's any emails coming from me. Got to do that admin as well. Donald Findlay goes on to say, of course, and Shane kind of clarifies and reiterates, so to speak, Messenger, so I didn't have to log on to Hotmail, it just popped up incomprehensible with, I think that'll be with any emails, popped up with any emails. Of course, and I can understand. So you go in, and that's what you're going to do. You shout hello, Shane says yes, and you, let's say you did stick your head into the living room. Correct. Through the living room door from the hall to the living room. Yes. Can you see the kitchen from there? No. No. Can you see the back from there? Can you see out the back, sorry, from there? No. Donald Findlay says no. No, really. You can see where the back garden is, but you don't have a panoramic. That's an incomprehensible answer there. So it says, have we got a picture of you shouting hello and standing, kind of figuratively speaking, with your hand cupped to your ear waiting for a reply? Or do you just wait and say hello and more or less carry on up the stairs once you've stuck your head round the living room door? Shane says, I'd probably just say it as I was walking through the door towards the stairs. So it's very much a passing hello, yes. And would there be anything different on this occasion? He says, I can't see any reason why. Well, I wonder about that, because why would there be any reason on this particular day for you to do anything different? And Shane says, no reason. No reason. Again, forgive me, Mr. Mitchell, I don't pry more than necessary, but with a combination of looking at a bit of porn on the car sites, a bit of porn and or car sites, something you did fairly regularly. And he says, yes. All right. And did you quite often come in from work and go to the computer? Yes. And sometimes, presumably, Luke would be in, and presumably he wouldn't be in. Sometimes you wouldn't know one way or the other. Shane says sometimes he would be in, but he'd be out in the garden or doing something else, so there was no chance of him coming up the stairs. Sure, I can understand. So this is a fairly normal occurrence. Yes. So the fact of the matter is that you came into the house, shouted hello, stuck your head around the living room door, and more or less, without breaking stride, came to the conclusion Luke wasn't there and went off upstairs. And Shane says yes. Now, have I put that fairly? He says, that's yes. And that was a mundane, ordinary, nothing whatsoever event as far as you were concerned. Shane agrees. Your mum came home a mundane, ordinary, and he says yes. You had some conversation with her, mundane, ordinary, yes. You had a meal, yes, which you can't remember where you had it, what it was, or what you had for that matter, or who was there. He says yes. Right. Now, over the piece, it would be right to say, and I won't take you through your statements unless it would assist you, that working from one statement to the next and looking to your interview, you have changed things, remembered different things, corrected things. Yes. But what I want the ladies and gentlemen of the jury to understand is this, because in fairness to you, they've heard other people changing things and correcting things sometimes, guided by receipts, switch cards, just as you were. And Shane says yes. Nothing sinister in that when you were speaking to of the police. Even if you've made mistakes, even if you've had to correct things, you were trying to were you trying to deceive the police? Shane says he wasn't. Were you doing your best that you could to remember what had happened? Shane says yes. But were you in fact, when we talk about the events of that evening, trying to remember things which at the time did not matter? And that's incomprehensible. Your mum came, I imagine that he agrees because he doesn't press the matter again. So your mum came in at 5:15. We know that. Yeah. Can you help the ladies and gentlemen of the jury with this? Can you even begin to tell them what your mum did over the next, say, hour? He says no. Why not? Because I was up the stairs for a while, and then when I came down, that's when it happened. So I didn't come down straight away. If somebody was to say to you, she went out into the garden and sat and had her tea in the garden, would your response be maybe she did, maybe she didn't? I don't know. And he said, there is every chance of that. She's done that a lot. So that would be something that she might have done, but you cannot say that she necessarily did. Shane says, no, I can't see through walls. It's getting sarky. Absolutely. And unless you absolutely went out into the garden and remembered going out into the garden, you wouldn't remember, you wouldn't know, never mind remember. And he says yes. Right, one of Luke's duties, I don't know if it was a duty, one of the things Luke did was he got the tea ready, as a rule. Normally, yes. And he was reasonably okay at that. Yes, some of his stuff was really good. Fair enough. Were you regularly home at a given time, or did your time for coming in vary? And Shane says, varied wildly. Varied wildly, so when you say, or when it is said that Luke's roles was to get the tea ready, would that primarily, yes, be for you, for him and your mum? And he says most of the time he'd make mine as well and leave it sitting next to the microwave until I'd get into the house and I'd microwave it. Bad luck. So you had to get yours microwaved? Yes. But basically, what he was doing, although he left yours, I suppose really what he's doing was getting your mum's ready for when she came in from work as much as anything else. Yes. Right. And that would almost invariably be 5:50. Yes, sometimes earlier, sometimes 5:05. Well, sometimes shortly after 5 is really what I should have said. You're quite right. Shane agrees. So one of his jobs would be to get the tea ready for your mum coming in shortly after 5, yes. He would make something, presumably he would normally make something for you and him, because if your mum didn't eat meat, if there was meat involved, he would have to make something different for her, yes. Again, I want to go back a point. A vegetarian doesn't eat chicken and doesn't eat prawns. So she doesn't eat red meat, that's not a vegetarian. Did we have different rules and regulations for vegetarians in 2003? Somebody tell me. And you would get yours as and when you came in, yes. But because your movements wildly varied, the tea would not be prepared for a time with you in mind. No. But it would be prepared with your mum in mind. Yes. Well, let's try and factor that into the picture. The norm would be for Luke to have the meal prepared, something ready for your mum. Yes. He might be in, he might go out, I suppose. Yes. You would get something to eat when you came in. Yes. Ordinary events, not something that you can or do now remember. No. So that night, when you went in at 5 o'clock, the likelihood is that Luke would have done something about the tea. Yeah. At 5 o'clock, you come round, without much break in stride, say hello, stick your head round the door, go upstairs to your room, and then your mum comes home. Yes. Then you come downstairs at some point, you don't know when. No. You have your meal, you don't know what. You have it where, you know not. And he says no. Your mother did about what your mother did about food or eating, and no, not. Shane says no. But at some point in time, you can be clear about this. At a point in time, it reached when Luke is not in, and you cannot be sure of that. No. For example, when you went out to see your friend, was Luke out? He says, I generally don't know. I don't remember seeing it. Well, that's what could have been somewhere. Bit of a mess there. I think we're interrupting each other. Well, that's what I want to understand. Is there any point in time at all of this when telling the truth, as you've been trying to do all along, as you said, Mr. Mitchell, is there any point in time in all of this where you can say, I know for a matter of fact that Luke was not in? And he says, I can't see that. Mr. Findlay says, you can't say that. I wonder, my lord, if that might be an appropriate time for the break. Lord Nimmo Smith says, well, I was just about wondering about, there must be that. And by the court, we'll take a short break now. And after a short adjournment, Donald Findlay carried on. So I just want to see here just now, again, this memory thing is getting a tad ridiculous. I don't know if anyone else has noticed all this. So we can remember that he had his tea before he went out. He doesn't know what he had. He knows his mum was there. He doesn't know what she had. He can't place Luke there. But he can tell you what he was thinking about on the way home, and the fact that he was going to go in. He can tell you the actions of popping his head in the door, having a little look in, not hearing any music, still can't remember what he had for dinner. And this idea, obviously, we're trying to put this look in the house every day around about 5 o'clock. This is what this whole line of questioning is. We want to put Luke there at 5 o'clock every day, making dinner for his mum coming home just after 5. The problem being with that then, that we have to admit that Luke isn't in the house. And he does that, Shane says under question, Luke isn't always in the house when he gets home, he could be out with mates. So the idea that dinner is made for his mum getting in can't be possible. Surely there must be days where it's made and has to be reheated by his mum, or indeed it's not made at all by Luke. All three things can't exist at the same time. And we're trying to paint a picture of a good young boy with his wee apron on in a kitchen making food for his tired old mum who works all the day, and in reality none of it can align, because if he's out of the house or if he's in the house, he still has to apparently make dinner, which means other people would be reheating it, not just Shane. So that whole questioning is just nonsense. Anyway, carrying on after the break. Donald Findlay continues. Mr. Mitchell, now can I address, I think it's supposed to be now anyway, can I introduce this chapter by asking you about a matter you discussed with my learned friend, the Advocate Depute, and forgive me if some of the questions that I'm about to ask seem to call for a glimpse of the glaringly obvious, but just bear with me. CDs normally have tracks, yes. Yeah, and if you go into, example, a room where a music CD is being played, you will hear music, yes. If you go into a room where at any given time the CD is not being played, or if there's nothing else being played, then presumably you'll not hear music, yes. If you stick your head into a room where a CD is being played, but it's just come to an end, what would you hear? He says nothing. If you stick your head into a room where a CD is playing and it's between tracks, what would you hear? Nothing. Right, we'll stop there, yeah, but the space in between tracks on a CD is seconds, milliseconds in some cases, so that doesn't fly. Right. Conundrum. A music CD is in the player. The player works. It's capable of playing what is on the CD. You stuck your head into a room where the CD is in a machine which works, but you hear no music. The question is there a CD in the machine? No. Of course not. How could you? No way of knowing if, however, we jump to the conclusion, which we will for now at the moment, there is a CD in the machine. Has it been played? And he says can't tell by looking at it. Well, you can in some, actually. You do get some CDs that change colour. There was a 9 Inch Nails album that done it. I can't remember what it was. It was like black, and then after you played it went white. I remember that. It was years ago though. I can't remember what album it was. I'm sure it was 9 Inch Nails. Anyway, may it play again if it was in a machine that would take it back to the beginning, for example, if it had just stopped playing and start again. And he said if it was on repeat. If it was on repeat, any way of knowing? No. So if you stick your head into a room and hear no music, would it be right to say that you can conclude, if you were approaching it in an open way, no more than this? At that point in time, no music was being played. And he says yes. So you see, on the 14th of April, you were interviewed by the police, having production number 60 in front of you, please. Can you just hold that up so the ladies and gentlemen of the jury can see it? And in turn, on the side, yes, exactly, side on, there is a fairly substantial ring-bound volume, isn't it? And he says yes. Does that in fact extend to 135 pages that contain questions and answers? Yes. And if you go to page 1, does that reveal that you were interviewed between 8:45 and 9:45? Yeah. 9:47 and 10:36, 10:36, 11:06 and 12:07, yes. And 12:11 and 13:12, yes. And then 13:12 to 13:07, yes. So between 8:45 and 13:17, there was only one break of any substance for half an hour, And beyond that, you're being interviewed more or less on continuous basis. Yes. Over that period of hours, just so the members of the jury can understand what was happening, were you being questioned? Yes. Is that all that was happening? What do you mean? Well, what is your name? And he says, Shane Mitchell. I have just asked you a question. Yes. And you've answered it. Yes. Your name is in fact Andrew Mitchell, isn't it? And I know it's Andrew Mitchell, don't I? No. That's also a question, I suppose, but it's actually putting something to you as a matter of fact, isn't it? Yes. That I know your name is not, in fact, Andrew Mitchell. Yes. It's also putting to you something that, although I claim it to be a matter of fact, is wrong. And he says yes. In the course of those number of hours, were the police simply asking you questions by saying what happened next? Who did what? Who went there? Or were the police putting to you things that they claimed to be matter of fact? And he says yes, they were doing that, and they were putting things forward that were wrong. Maybe they were just trying to correct your previous statement, Shane. You were aware that they were actually putting to you things which were wrong. He says yes. And you knew them to be wrong. Yes. And when they put forward things that you knew to be wrong, were the police claiming them to be matters of fact? And he says yes. So they were putting to you assertions of fact that were misleading? Yes. So let's factor this into the picture. We know from what you said, it's a matter for the jury that the moment, let us say, that we know on the day of June 30th, it was perfectly normal, perfectly mundane. No reason why you should pay any attention to any sort of mundane or trivial details. Shane agrees with that. We know that you don't have a good memory because you truthfully told us that. He says yes. I still have major doubts over the reason for that. I do not believe that is based in science at all. I know some drugs can cause memory problems, but not to that effect and not for that period of time. That's absolute nonsense. We know because you had truthfully told us that you have sometimes difficulty in sorting out what you do remember as opposed to what you may remember because you've been told. And he says yes. So you're interviewed on the 3rd of July, you're interviewed on the 7th of July, and particularly on the 7th of July, you're interviewed by a police officer who seems to be determined, from what I can tell us, to get you to tell her the things that she thinks she should be hearing. And he says yes. You are a long time later, interviewed against the background of whatever word one wants to use for the conduct of the police at the time of your apprehension. A distressing behaviour by the police. Shane says yes. You're interviewed over a period of hours, over the course of which you're asked questions. Things are put to you that are claimed to be matters of fact, and things are put to you that are claimed to be matters of fact, which we know are probably wrong. He says yes. Can I add something? Please. In the police car on the way to the station to be questioned, I was told that if I didn't answer the questions that they wanted answered, I would definitely be going to jail for a minimum of 3 years. Oh really? Yes, Yes, I was told I had destroyed evidence and that was going to be happening to me. So the police now decide these things, do they? According to you, they said what they said to you. That's what they said to me in the car. I see. Before the tapes went on. Oh yes, there wouldn't be a tape in the car, would there? And he says no. No, I understand. And many weeks and months have gone between July 2003 and April 2004, yes. And all sorts of things have happened to your family. I don't in any way demean or distress or grief that Jodi's family have gone through, but let's just concentrate on your family for the moment. All sorts of things have happened. Your house had been searched, you had the media climbing all over you, and you had your brother in and out of newspapers. They wouldn't let him go back to school, and all sorts of things had been going on. Shane says yes. None of which really had anything to do with you, but you were caught in the middle of it. Shane agrees. And in addition to police officers putting things to you, putting things into your mind which maybe were right and maybe were wrong, your mum also, you spoke to her and she also said to you things as she'd recollected them having happened, says yes. I guess a bit of a get out clause there for Luke's mum, but I suppose Donald Findlay's going to be, we'll get into that question as well with Donald Findlay. So you're getting information coming at you over a period of days and weeks and months from many directions. Shane says yes, about matters which in actual fact were mundane and ordinary in the extreme, and you had no reason to pay any attention to them at all. That's incomprehensible, but he doesn't look to clarify, so I imagine that he does agree. Again, can you just help me with one thing, please? Can we just be absolutely clear about it? And I'm sorry to go back to it, but on Wednesday the 30th, when the porn was on your computer, were you in fact masturbating? Shane says, I can't honestly remember that. Well, I mean, what else? No one watches it for the storylines. Donald Findlay, well, I wondered that you see, because you were first asked about this in April 2004. Yes. Now that's that. It's that number of months thereafter. Did you have in your mind a clear picture of what happened when you went up to your room and were on the computer? Shane says no. Why did you then end up telling the police that you had in fact been masturbating on that occasion? He says, I really don't know. I thought I might have been. Sure. I'm putting it very generally. I suppose looking at it generally, it is possible that if someone is looking at pornographic image, they may masturbate to those images, and again, it would be fair to say, Mr. Mitchell, that is something, it is a free country after all, something you from time to time did. And he says yes. And it's your choice. You can do what you like. Nothing to do with anybody else. And he says no. You've got Donald Findlay's permission to have a wee shot of yourself. So please don't think any aspersions being cast towards you at all. Certainly not by me. But as far as that particular day is concerned, never mind what could have happened or what might have happened. What even was your kind of normal way of doing things? Simple, straightforward question. On the day that Jodi died, were you watching the porn? Did you in fact masturbate? And he says, I don't know. When you were watching the porn, did you masturbate? He says, I don't know. You don't know, but in the course of your interview with the police, did you not know then? Was that really the position that back in April last year you didn't know that then either? And he says, I didn't know then. But by the time the interview has progressed to a certain extent, did it actually continue on the basis that you had, as if it had been established as a matter of fact? Shane says yes. So to some extent, did you just give in to the police? Shane says yes. I don't want to be unkind, Mr. Mitchell, but it may be appropriate and fair to you to put this proposition to you for your consideration. If you don't want to answer it, just you say, if you're put under any kind of pressure to remember something, for example, do you tend to just give in perhaps too easily? Shane says, I do, because people didn't seem to remember things. So he gives in too easily, essentially. It's a bit of a mess, but he gives in. Shane says that he's given in too easily. He's a bit of a pushover. And yet, and again, let me try and be absolutely fair about this. I suppose if your mum said to you, this is what happened, you might be inclined to think that was probably right. And he says yes. And if you're alone in the police station, the police officers who are telling you things, might you just eventually adopt a line of, I think it'll be least resistance, and kind of give in? He says yes. Because in the course of that interview on the 14th of April as recorded, you told the police on numerous occasions about things on the basis that you just could not remember. And he says yes. And did the police say to you on more than one occasion, in effect, not remembering isn't an option, that's not good enough, we're not interested in not remembering? And he says, I can't remember. You can't even remember that, but you've already told the members of the jury that Mrs. Lindsay, when you said you couldn't remember things, was in effect saying to you not remembering wasn't an option. Well, in the interview we were talking about, I thought we were talking about the one in April. I was, but let me get back to Michelle Lindsay's interview. Yes. Did the jury understand that even during that interview, at that early stage, she was saying things to you which in effect amounted to not remembering is not an option? Shane says yes. And then would put a picture in your mind? Yes. Because she didn't just say to you, as we understand it, picture what happened in the kitchen. She said to you, picture Luke mashing the ties. Yes. And it would seem, would it not, Mr. Mitchell, if I'm to be fair about it, of course, if somebody says to you or describes a picture to you that is possible, you have a great difficulty in sorting out what's possible from what actually did happen. And he says yes. Well, let me just try this, just to see where we are. In relation to the computer use on 30th of June, we know from records that you were on the computer for some and some of the sites that you were looking at. Do you actually remember using the computer that night? I remember using my computer, but I don't remember what and it's incomprehensible. You don't remember what? Do you even remember, as opposed to what you know, because of what has been recovered, do you remember downloading a picture of Hamesy? And he says no. So you don't actually remember that? No. When I was told that the picture was there, I remember seeing. I didn't remember it was that day, but I remember seeing that picture and thinking it was incomprehensible. Well, let's just take one example. I'm not going to go through any more detail than this much, but just take one example. Look at page 108 of the police interview, okay? At the top, question, did you go downstairs when you were watching that site for 22 minutes? Well, in fact, you weren't watching that site for 22 minutes. You were watching a number of sites. Yes. So, that's wrong. Answer, I did, I left the room. Question, right, what happened then? After, I can't remember. And Shane agrees. Question, you told me you'd left the room. So how can you remember you leave the room and then you say, I can't remember, and then the other policeman, he comes in and says, how do you remember logging into the site? And what is your answer to the police? Shane says, because you've told me about it. Because you've told me about it. So in April of last year then, you couldn't remember logging onto the site. You remembered because the police had told you, and Shane agrees again. Does that necessarily make it right because the police tell you things? And he says no. No. Does anything become necessarily right because someone tells you? He says no. But you do you not, Mr. Mitchell, seem to be someone who is influenced by whoever it is that is standing in front of you and putting propositions to you. Sorry, circumstances are, if we are in the realms of possibilities as opposed to things that you absolutely know, do you seem to be influenced by whoever it is at any given time that is putting propositions to you? Yes. And that includes me. And that includes me. And he says yes. Well, Mr. Mitchell, you know, you're not here just to agree with matters that are put to you. You understand that? He says, I know, I can't honestly remember these things. So continued by Mr. Findlay. But the difference perhaps is, Mr. Mitchell, what I'm asking you, and in a sense putting to you, is about the whole range of the matters that I've been asking you about. You're truthfully saying you can't remember. And that is the truth. And he says that's the truth. And at the time, you couldn't remember. Yes. Now let's just look at that. Can you remember being on the internet? Yes. From 30th of June? Yes. Can you remember what you were looking at? No. Can you remember what you were downloading a picture? Can you remember downloading a picture of Hamesy? No. Can you actually remember your mum coming in? No. Can you actually remember where, what, or when you had your meal? No. Can you remember when you went out? Just after I spoke to on the phone. And that's as good as it gets. Yes, I don't look at the clock or incomprehensible of the times, phone records. Donald Findlay continues, and here I am putting something to you, which of course you know you must disagree with if it's your position, but this was a day of absolutely mundane to the point in time. And he says, yes, definitely. And it is, at the end of the day, your position is that, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't remember if Luke was in the house or not. And he says yes. And we can put, as it happened in this case, put things to you which may suggest he wasn't in the house, and that's a possibility. Yeah? And he says yes. But equally, since you can't remember, then until the time he left the house, because we know he left the house at some point, until the time he left the house, you just don't know, can't remember between what times he was in fact in the house. Is that right? And he says, that's right. And that's the truth, isn't it? And he says, yes. That's the truth. You're now engaged. And he says, pardon? You are now engaged. Shane says, yes. To your long-term girlfriend? Yes. What is her name? Just her Christian name. Oh, she's also got the C word for her name. You have been advised, in fact, just the other day there, that in relation to the matter that caused you to be detained by the police, no proceedings were to be taken against you. He says, yes. When did you first discover that no proceedings were to be taken against you? He says, I was told that might be the case. When did you first discover as opposed to might? A couple of days ago. One incomprehensible. Findlay says, right? Tuesday it was. Well, come on. The first day of the court. He says, yes, but you see, you had been arrested. Well, I'm sorry, you were detained against the background of a roadblock, all of which we discussed. We're not going to go and revisit that. Hauled off to a police station, interviewed for many hours against the background of a suggestion that you had perverted the course of justice. A serious matter. You were told you were going to get 3 years. Yes. And weeks and months go by and you don't know, as a matter of fact, whether you're going to be prosecuted or not. Shane says yes. And then you come into this court and you're told by the learned advocate depute, because that's what happened, in effect, that no proceedings were to be taken against you. You were not to be prosecuted for attempting to pervert the course of justice. Shane says yes. When were you told that? A couple of days ago, the first time I was in court. What day was that? What day is today? Sorry, what day is today? I think we all, in this case, sometimes get confused about the days, in fairness, Mr. Mitchell. I think it was Tuesday, says Shane. Thursday today. I think it was Tuesday then. When, on Tuesday, what time? He says Tuesday morning. When? Whenever I first got into court. I mean, that might be, I don't know, that might be something that would stick in anybody's mind as being fairly important. And it doesn't seem to me a fact that it's a kind of extent to your memory, is it? Shane says no. So by the court, this was something that happened while the jury were out of the courtroom. Is that right, Mr. Mitchell? He says, I can't remember if they were in or not. Cross-examination continues. See, so no doubt about it. Tuesday you think it was, yes? Shane says yes. Do you know what happened in this trial on Tuesday? He says, I was late. I was late in, getting called up, but got asked a few questions and it was time to go home. Donald Findlay says, not on Tuesday, on Monday. And Shane corrects him, Monday. On Monday we didn't do anything. On Tuesday there was no evidence on Tuesday. Do you know what happened on Monday afternoon in the trial? He says what I just said there. Yeah, so you didn't get a warning any day after lunch. You didn't get this information any day after lunch. It certainly wasn't Tuesday. You actually got the information on Monday before the lunch adjournment and you don't remember it. And he says, no, pressures and stresses. Well, yeah, he didn't remember that day was Thursday. So that's not really a memory thing, that's also an understanding thing. Let's not get the two conflated. Continues, I hear what you say. Give me a moment, please. Two matters just to conclude, please. One formal. On the day you were detained by the police, that's 14th of April, when did you first get access to your solicitor? Do you remember? He says, I didn't. After the interview process concluded, were you charged with an offence? He says, yes. Did you sometime thereafter get access to a solicitor? Shane says, yes. And do you remember how long after that before you got to see your solicitor? I think it was a couple of days. I think the final question I have to ask is this, Mr. Mitchell. On the 14th of April 2003, did you believe that Luke had been in the house and had been making the tea that night? As at 14th of April. He says, yes, prior to being interviewed by the police, was that your best recollection that he had been in the house and he'd been doing something with the tea? Incomprehensible. Or by then, did you know? He says, I didn't know. So by the 14th of April, that you then didn't know one way or the other? No. And he says, thank you, Mr. Mitchell. And that's the end of Donald Findlay's questioning. So the re-examination by the Advocate Deputy Alan Turnbull, carrying on, only 10 pages more to read through in this one and we're all done, so it'll be a bit short than the last one as well. But carrying on here, I only have a few matters to clarify with you, Mr. Mitchell. You've been telling us about the interview when Detective Constable Michelle Lindsay was putting pressure on you and telling you that your answers weren't good enough. Shane says yes. Now, did you tell the police about that during your taped interview on the 14th of April? He says, I think so. Yes, and you'll remember that taped interview, one of the officers was called Detective Constable Thompson. He says, right. And did he not continue to tell you during your taped interview that he was present when the statement was taken by the Detective Constable on there? And he says, I think so, yes. Yes, and he was telling you that you weren't right in saying what you did about being put under pressure and told were acceptable. And he says, well, he is obviously going to say that, isn't he? Well, that may be right, but that's what he was saying to you, isn't it? And he says, yes. Okay, now it's also right, isn't it, that on the very first interview, 3rd of July interview, you didn't mention anything to the police about what you had for tea? He says, can't remember. Yeah, it was only in the interview on the 7th of July that you told them about having mashed potatoes and burnt pies. And he says, yes. Right, now you see, one of the things that I want to understand is this, Mr. Findlay, put to you that all along you were doing your best to remember what happened. And he says, yes. And you said, yes, that's right, I was, yes. And well, is that true? Apart from the incident with the porn, says Shane. Well, there are others, because all along you had known that you had been watching porn, didn't you? I can't remember. Well, do you want me to read you a question that I asked you yesterday and your answer? Will I do that? He says, go then. You explained to me that you had first told the police you were watching porn on the interview of the 14th of April. I asked you the question, why had you not mentioned it before? Do you remember that? Yes. And your answer was, it was not something I wanted to broadcast. I didn't think it was relevant. I wasn't asked directly. That's what you told me yesterday, didn't you? And he says, yes. So yesterday, when I asked you a simple explanation, not putting an explanation to you, just asking why you had not mentioned it before, you were able to explain it to me, weren't you? And he says, yes. And explained it to me in a way that makes sense. You told me that you were embarrassed. You didn't want to mention it. That's what you said, didn't you? And he says, yes. Right. Quite the same as not quite the same, as all along doing your best to remember and not being able to. It's slightly different, isn't it? Yes. That's all along making a choice not to tell the whole truth to the police because you were embarrassed, isn't it? And he says, it's a very small point. Well, it may be a small point to you, but that's the truth, isn't it? Yes. Okay. Now let me just see what your position is on this, please, Mr. Mitchell. When I asked you questions, did you find them difficult to understand? No, not really. Did you find them difficult to answer? Yes. Why was that? Because everything happened such a long time ago that I'm struggling to remember everything. Fair point. Okay, how do you feel about the fact that you're being called as a witness in a case against your own brother? He says, nervous. Okay, can't be a comfortable situation. No. When I was asking you questions, was I suggesting things to you that you knew to be wrong? He says, I don't think so. No. Did you find me someone who was trying to mislead you? No. Did you find me someone who was trying to bully you? No. Did you answer my questions truthfully? I think so. Right. There is another thing I want to ask you about, arising out of the questions Mr. Findlay asked you. He said to you, if you are put under any kind of pressure to answer, do you tend to just give in? And your answer was, I do, aye. People don't seem to understand how difficult it is to remember. You probably remember saying that no more than a quarter of an hour ago or so. And he says, yes. Well, you know, Mr. Mitchell, I want to draw something to your attention in that context. Have before you production 157 and production 60. And he says, okay. Production 167, 157 is a collection of statements that you gave to the police, isn't it? And he says, yes. From there, yes. And as we saw, they run to many pages, many words on each page. Yes. Hours and hours of discussion between you and the police. Yes. Right. Production 60. Have you still got that? Yes. Again, it's a tape recorded transcript. You held it up to show us before. Yes. Do so again, please. Many pages of questions and answers. Yes. Hours and hours of discussion between you and the police. Yes. Do you remember what you pointed out to me, just towards the tail end of the questions I asked you this morning? No. Do you remember that you pointed out to me, you said, wait a minute, have I ever said that I heard music? Do you remember you pointed that out to me? Yes. Yes, and I pointed out, because I was wondering why you were asking me about music all the time. He says, exactly. Well, you see, I know why I'm asking you about that, and the ladies and gentlemen probably do as well, but the point is, Mr. Mitchell, you knew that in all of those interviews, and all of the hours of discussions you had with police, you had never said to them that you had heard music being played. Isn't that right? Yes. That's what you pointed out to me. And you were correct. Your memory has been pretty good on that in that matter, hasn't it? He says, well, see, the days I was interviewed by the police were quite memorable. As opposed to the day of the murder, which wasn't very memorable at all. Yes, and the last thing that was put to you was, towards the end, that in April of last year, you couldn't remember logging on, and you only agreed with that because the police told you. Remember that? At the time, yes. But you know, Mr. Mitchell, when I said to you, why did you mention before to the police that you had been watching porn, you didn't say it was because I'd forgotten and it was only when the police reminded me that I remembered. You said because it's not something you want to broadcast, because I was embarrassed. That's what you said to me, didn't you? Yes. And you also said to me this morning, before Mr. Findlay asked you questions about questions, that it was true all along. So as the 30th of June 2003, it was true that you had been watching porn on that day. He says, I didn't understand exactly how you were putting it. Okay. Really? He just said that he didn't have any problems understanding the questions. He's already asked, Alan Turnbull's already asked Shane that. So anyway, and you told me that you all along. What? I thought you were summarising what you'd asked me in your question, Shane replies. So he says, well, we'll do it again. If there's any difficulty, what is true is that on the 30th of June 2003, you were watching pornography. That must have been the case, yes, replies Shane. Well, you know that's the case. You know that's the case, don't you? He says, I know that's the case because you've showed me in the pictures and the internet records, so it must be incomprehensible. Remember that the other day. Right, and you've all along known that it was what you were doing at that day. Not all along, no. You chose not to tell the police that because you thought it was a small detail and you thought it was embarrassing. No, in the days previous, my mind was all over the place where I was getting my first interviews done. And you told me yesterday, this morning, that you didn't tell the police that because it was embarrassing. That's right, isn't it? That's this morning, yeah. Yes, and do you know there is one other thing that I'm going to have to draw to your attention to, because Mr. Findlay said to you that by 14th of April, your position... Oh, there's a wee thing on there. As we fold over the page there, guys. So it must be, I'm going to, you couldn't recall that, so just looking at this just now, Shane's position obviously was that he couldn't recall seeing Luke in the house at the time. So I think that's what's going on. And you agreed by the 14th of April, you just didn't know if he was in the house or not. Yes. So yeah, that's what Kenny's position now. Might have been, might not. Yes. Okay. Well, I want to look at it that way, the way you express yourself. On the 14th of April, to the police when you were asking, when they were asking you about that. And I want you to look at, with me, no at me, we're getting back to that again. I want you to look with me at production 60 of the transcript and page 117. It's 6 lines up from the bottom of the page. Do you have it? Yes. Do you see it begins as an answer from you? And he says yes. Read it to us. 80% sure he wasn't in the house. 80% sure he wasn't in the house. Yes. That's the way you expressed yourself to the police on the 14th of April of last year. After yes. He says, okay, thank you. By the court, thank you. That is all. And that's the end of the question. So let's do a little wrap up and let's finish up this video. And thanks for sticking with me through this one as well. So thank you to all those who stuck with me for reading through that. This is where my opinion comes in a little bit comparison, so I understand some people might want to jump off just now. But I want to look at something that has been said by Sandra Lean in terms of Shane Mitchell, the testimony, and a couple of other things as well. Now, the thing being that with Shane Mitchell, he is somewhat of a taboo subject when it comes to Luke's Army. The recent admins that also left the pages on Facebook had spoke about how if, you know, the mentioning members of the Mitchell family was out of bounds, and they were asked to make sure that those subjects weren't discussed and removed from the groups themselves. Indeed, after making the last Transcibed video, it seems that when people started asking questions within these groups as well, they were banned from discussing anything and kicked out the groups. So that, again, it's anecdotal in the sense that I've only seen 2 or 3 names that I knew that had been, you know, said they'd been thrown out for asking questions. Some of them will be listening to this. You can probably put comments down below. Did you not find it suspicious that as soon as you started asking questions about Shane Mitchell, you were asked to leave? Because you've now listened, or you've had a chance to read through all of Shane's testimony, you see the holes in it and what has been said beforehand, and now you've got more questions than you've had answers from, shall we say, the experts, the Carneys, Dr. Sandra Lean, and that's the only time you'll hear me say doctor, because she's not one. And she might have a qualification, but yeah, but not in criminology. I don't want to get too much into that. If you guys are ever looking for more information on all that stuff, then we do have Killing Time. I don't want to turn this into another episode of that. So instead, what I'll do is a little comparison here. This was, as I say, the taboo subject, but Shane has spoke about very rarely, every now and again. with kid gloves. This is from a podcast called Jibber Jabber, where one of the few times where she went into any kind of detail about Shane Mitchell for obvious reasons. So what I want to do is we'll watch a little video here of Sandra going through Shane's testimony. I might have to break it up because it's quite a long video, so it's about 4 minutes. I might break it up and cover a couple of points, play the rest, but I've got another couple of things I want to go through, and then I'll do a wrap up, and that's us all done, guys. So let's see what Sandra Lean had to say about Shane Mitchell and his testimony.
Yeah, there was another thing that doesn't really go well in Luke's favour as well, is, and a lot of people have said this in questions leading up to about his brother, and how his brother kind of didn't back up the fact that Luke was in the house at the time. People, and I know you might not even be able to answer a lot surrounding this question, right? But you know, he said something about he masturbates in the house when he's alone, and he said that's what he was doing. Now that like kind of makes you think, well, even if it was my brother, well, it's a funny one, right? Because it kind of makes him look like a liar.
Yeah.
Is it a case that he just didn't know that Luke was in the house? Because I'm sure.
The case is, and this was raised at appeal. Donald Findlay raised it at appeal. They wouldn't accept anything his brother said as true. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. They were putting words in his mouth. They were actually putting pictures in his head. Picture this, Shane. Picture this, right? And eventually, when they arrested him, now his brother got halfway up the street, and they dragged him out of his car, laid him spread-eagled on the road. Half a dozen police cars screaming at him, took him away, and basically told him, "You're going down, because we didn't believe what you're telling." And he told them, and he told them, and he told them, and he told them that Luke was there, yada yada yada. And Donald Findlay said at appeal, they tried to break his brother to get him to say what they wanted him to say, the same way they tried to break Luke.
So let's take what Sandra's saying there. Shane had admitted that Luke was at the home there. Did you hear that? He said Luke was at home, yada yada yada. So we know from reading through these transcripts that that's not exactly how that went down. Now, is it? Now, let's be honest. Sandra Lean is right in saying that, you know, he was questioned more than once and he wouldn't accept some of his answers because he was correct in statements that he admittedly said himself contained mistakes. So the idea that police are pushing people for a definite answer in a murder case, and that somehow people should be treated with kid gloves when they're suspected of perverting the course of justice, is absolutely ridiculous. I also think that the you know, saying that you can go down and you can you know, go to jail and stuff like that, I don't really see how that's in any way confusing the situation, letting someone know what the chances of them, you know, what they would face if they were charged and found guilty of what they're currently facing. That's not a hardship either. It's not a bad thing. I don't see why people are trying to paint this out as a bad thing, because you were scaring them. Wow. At the end of the day, the guys were being questioned, Shane and his mum were being questioned for covering up for a murder. So this whole idea of, you know, having to, what do you call it, confirm an actual story here. Now, let's bear in mind as well that by this point, the police would be fully aware that Luke Mitchell and Corinne Mitchell have not put Shane Mitchell in the house for tea. Then Corinne Mitchell goes and speaks to Shane and says, "No, you were home. Just tell the police this," and tells them about mash and tatties. No mash and tatties. There was pie and tatties. Sorry, getting that important fact wrong there. The pie didn't exist, really. I mean, if it did, it was probably cooked prior in the day Because, like we've said before, if Shane's reheating his meals and Luke is often out with his friends, then isn't Corinne sometimes reheating her meals? The vegetarian that eats meat. So let's have another look at the kind of other part of the conversation that Sandra had with Jibber Jabber. I'm not sure of their names, so I'll refer to them as Mr. Jibber and Mr. Jabber. And let's see what she had going forward from here about Shane and his treatment, behaviour, testimony, whatever you want to call it.
So by the time it got, his brother was like completely all over the place, because now he's like, they said to him, you couldn't say that Luke was in the house, and he said on the stand, I said at the time, I remembered at the time, but they've confused me so much. Now I don't know what I'm remembering properly and what I'm remembering for, like, what they bombarded me with. That was the point at which the prosecution thrust the pictures of Jodi's mutilated body in front of him with no warning. Wasn't allowed a break, continued straight on, and then they put the thing about masturbating in his room, and he wouldn't have done that if he thought anybody else was in.
Now that is some rewriting of what actually happened, isn't it? Now, Ms. Lean has access to all the transcripts according to her. However, a lot of them haven't been transcribed, so how she has them, I have no idea. That's another thing for killing time, I suppose, but that was another episode we done. Here though, let's take the points. So, one point that I would like to first address was Sandra said the photos were thrust upon Shane Mitchell without any warning. Let's go back and listen to that part of the transcript again and see what actually happened. And I want you to look with me at Productions number 1. Now, you don't need to open that for me at the moment. You'll see that it's a booklet. Do you see that? Yes. Don't ever see it before, have you? And he says, no, I don't think so. Okay. It contains photographs, Mr. Mitchell, that were taken at the Rowansteig path after the body of Jodi Jones had been found there, sorry. Do you follow me? Yes. Now I want you to look at the photograph N in the... So right there, we see that there was ample warning given to Shane before he opened the booklet. He was told not to open, it was explained exactly what was going to be in it, and then he was asked to open the book. Now, in Ms. Lean's version of events, it's like, gives you the impression that someone's just walked up, chucked a couple of photos down, without warning, just for you in front of your face to say, look at this. And it gives you the idea, because I suppose you would see it on a TV show, wouldn't you? That's how a kind of rogue lawyer would work. What about this? And then throw down some stuff to kind of get some emotional response from the person on the stand. But it's not how it happened. It's much in the same way of Shane's arrest. There was half a dozen cars and lots of people screaming at him, and he was spread out and this and that. If we look back at this transcripts, we can see exactly what happened. Maybe 4 cars, maybe 5 cars. Again, we don't know how many people. It could be anything between 4 to 10. It's not going to be this kind of thing that Sandra Lane's made out. Now, that paints a good story. What else did she say about that wasn't true? Well, let's have a little look. Okay, look on with me at photograph V for Victor. Can I have a wee break for a minute, please? Understandable. By the court, you can sit down for a moment. Examination in chief continued by the Lord Advocate Depute. That'll be Alan Turnbull again. Are you all right, Mr. Mitchell? Can you look with me? So really, when you break it down, there's no truth in what Ms. Lean says about Shane's testimony. Now, we know that Shane didn't put Luke in the house. 80% sure that he wasn't in the house. That came from Alan Turnbull. Now, just to kind of sum this all up, really here, I do find that Alan Turnbull had a lot of moments where he showed that Shane was not trustworthy and was not telling the truth. I think at any point, really. He was able to confirm that he was in the house only because of his records in terms of the internet, but that in itself put Luke outside of the house. There was a couple of elements in there where, Donald Findlay tried to put question marks over anything considered with Shane's memory. Now, Sandra doesn't go into details with that, but definitely does use the same techniques in terms of, Shane didn't say this, Shane didn't say that. He was put under question by Alan Turnbull on more than one occasion during the question and the re-examination, just to clarify that he had not put Luke in the house. Now, again, one thing that he did point out, Alan Turnbull, was Shane had no problem recollecting what he had said in all those interviews concerned with music, but he couldn't remember anything else in those interviews when it came to either who was in the house, what was, for dinner, etc., etc. So Shane, as I said for the very start of this, had a very selective memory. And the reality is that this is one of the things that show that Luke Mitchell did not have an alibi. Now, I know there's a couple of angry typers that will probably be watching this and comment on this and clip it and do what they do, but we do need an answer as to how Luke Mitchell did not put Shane in the house. Shane did not put Luke in the house, but Corinne Mitchell had his dinner cooked by Luke. There's just too many holes in Shane's story. The idea, again, that he can remember what he was doing in terms of fixing a car, he can remember who he spoke to, but he can't remember who was in the house, his own house that day on June 30th, 2003. So the reality is Shane was out to protect himself here. I can understand in terms of when he was faced with the charges of corruption that he did kind of roll over, so to speak. And it is just my speculation, but I do find it very coincidental that after Shane had given his final interview to the Procurator Fiscal, I've done it again, then he, was kind of ostracised for the family by the looks of it. I do find it suspicious as well, and I will say that when he installed a lock in his own bedroom door shortly after the murder, I do find that is very suspicious as well. I think that shows a lack of trust on Shane's part. Why was it not there before if it was required? So there's a lot of elements to Shane's testimony which I hope you've noticed as well. The memory, the flip-flopping in memory, remembering things, not remembering things. And then with Donald Findlay, I find the questioning from himself was very get out of jail, in terms of he wouldn't pry too much and he wouldn't ask too many details. But that's because he didn't want to address what the reality was. Now, you'll notice as well, Donald Findlay never spoke about any statements given by Luke Mitchell in terms of where he was and where Shane was. And again, I think that's selective on his part. Ms. Lean also uses Donald Findlay's techniques. There's no denying it. We've read through Donald Findlay's questioning and we know that, Ms. Lean promotes this image. There's a reason for that. And it's a basic reason. The reason is Sandra Lean is an advocate of Luke Mitchell. So any good excuse that's already been invented or shared from someone like Donald Findlay is going to get latched onto. I know they've said in the past there's certain things that they didn't agree with in terms of Donald Findlay's decision making, but that is even more odd considering they use his reasons for argument, especially given examples where he had used something on appeal. Again, go back to that, I don't think it's a negative that the police made Shane aware what he would have been culpable for if he was found guilty of corruption. That's actually, a part of probably what you would want to know if you were facing those charges. So to use that as a negative is rubbish. A lot of what Sandra Lean has said in the Jibber Jabber podcast, absolute rubbish. And before I kind of do a quick wrap up though, I do want to actually point out something that I've pointed out in other things as well. There is, at some points, where podcasters and people asking the questions are so close to actually thinking and saying out loud, that doesn't make any sense. And then they talk themselves out of it. So I've got a great example of that here. And I'll maybe do a killing time where I show other examples of, I know, Barhead Boy, I think it was. The guy that they broke between Ms. Leanan and Mr. Forbes. They actually broke the man. He made a strange noise. I might do a couple with them, because he had a couple, and Mr. Gibber, he has some on this podcast as well, where you think, just carry that thought on, just keep going, but they don't, because they'd end up down an undeniable road as far as I'm concerned. So I do, as I say, I want to just show a quick example of that. So let's have a quick look at that, and then I'll do a wrap up of this video altogether.
Just too heavily in the documentary, and somebody was asking why he wasn't around helping his mum in the situation she was in. Is that something that you can discuss, or are we kind of in too deep water with that?
It's not. All I'm going to say is, look at what they did to Luke and Corinne. They would have done that to anybody else, and to me to a certain extent. They would have done that to anybody else that was in the public domain. You're a young man and you've got a girlfriend and you're going to get married and you're never going to have kids. Would you put yourself on the line for that?
Yeah.
If I believed my brother was innocent, if I truly believed my brother was innocent, and they've already made this, Luke becomes no Luke anymore, he becomes this monster and killer in the eyes of everyone, right? If they've already done that to him, and I know 100% that he's innocent, I would, for my own brother.
Well,
he might. Then again, I've not experienced what he's experienced.
Yeah.
He was so close there, really, wasn't he? But he made a valid point. If it was your brother, you absolutely would be fighting. However, as we've already pointed out in Speculation Station and everything else, it didn't happen. It is only Corinne and Luke that seem to be fighting the good fight, so to speak. So it's a valid question, why wasn't Shane helping Corinne out when she was apparently so destitute that she was living in a shed, which again she wasn't, especially by that point. And I do want to put this here before it slips my mind totally. We also have to remember that out with the case of Luke Mitchell, Corinne Mitchell was taken to court over a man's death. Now that would cause financial ruin, wouldn't it? The liability for something like that is astronomical. So let's not confuse the situation here. There is a lot more to the Corinne Mitchell story, and I hate to be as blunt as say it, but that's because she caused a man's death. Please, just really take that in for a second. Corinne Mitchell was charged with negligence in a man's death through the sale of a caravan. Let's not pretend that this is some great, home cooking innocent mother, because she's not. And I'll show you in her transcripts as well for her testimony that she's even worse than Shane. And that's why we've done these two first, because these stand out if you're willing to read and if you're willing to pay attention. So whilst wrapping this up, I want to thank everybody who has been willing to read, who has been willing to pay attention, and understand a wee bit more nuanced than some crazy story by someone pretending to be a criminologist and someone pretending to be a lawyer. Really. So let's go into Corinne Mitchell's next time. Again, just do this wrap up here. I don't believe that Shane forgot half the things that he forgot, given that he could remember half the things that he could remember. I do feel this was definitely a damage limitation for Shane while somehow trying to protect his brother, and it didn't work. anyone who can make head nor tail of how, Shane's saying he's here, he's not here, he is there, he could have been there, he's 80% sure he's not there, he might have been in the garden. No, this is absolute nonsense. There is another couple of things that I would ask whilst we just wrap up here as well, and you might be able to answer it. So let's try. Where's the dog? Where is Mia? Who is looking after Mia? And what is her daily routine? So, it's just a question, just a strange little thing in the back of my head, but I would like an answer. So, with that in mind, that's all for this one. A wee bit shorter than the last one, but still quite a long video, so thank you for putting up with my terrible attempt at reading English. Thank you for everybody that's been speaking in the chat. I have no doubt been replying. I would hope I've been replying. I'm not that ignorant, I don't think. And I will see you the next time for Corinne Mitchell's prosecution questioning with Alan Turnbull. That again will be a long one, but after we've done with these two, then they should be a little bit shorter and a wee bit easier to take. So, thank you again for everybody that watches these videos. Thank you to everybody who subscribed, especially you new guys, and all the likes on the last video, views on the last video, all that kind of thing as well. It gives me a little bit of vindication of what I'm doing here, because I think it's quite useful. However, if you would like to carry on this little journey, please do subscribe. Leave us a little sarcastic thumbs up. Also, give us a comment, but do not be a Derek. You can follow us on X. You can follow us on Facebook, but I really don't use that a lot at all. So it's probably X or YouTube. Leave a comment below if you guys are of the view that Luke is still innocent. How do you kind of put these two things together? Anyway, I would still like, arguments are arguments, but I'd still like to talk about it. Anyway, thank you again for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.